Hey, what is up, disc golfers? Today on Iceberg TV, I want to talk about my experience working with and throwing only dynamic discs for the last 2 weeks. So Dynamic Discs reached out to me and they said, hey, we're starting this new affiliate program where we give you a discount code, we save your audience some money, and we give you a little bit of cash kickback on the tail end if anyone uses your link to buy anything. So I waited a couple weeks and eventually a huge package of dynamic discs and some other Trilogy discs showed up at my door. And I got basically straight to work. I started filming videos, learning the discs. I went full dynamic for the entire period of time and played several different league days, played against some local pros. And I want to tell you guys what my experience has been like. And I want to go over basically the entire lineup I've been using, from putters all the way up to distance drivers. So first, what I have here are my 2 putting putters and my approach disc. Now first, the whole time I was putting with the Supreme Classic Judge. I really love how low profile these are. I didn't think at first that I would like how low profile they are, but I think that putters with this more low profile Luna type shape tend to be a little bit faster. And I was noticing that speed out on the putting green. I found myself much more accurate from circle's edge, just inside the circle, and any circle 2 putts. So I probably putted over the last 2 weeks the best I've ever putted in my entire life, especially from circle 2. And I think that these were really solid. They're not, I don't love like super gummy soft putters. These are firm, but they have that little bit of tacky feel to them where they feel a little bit grippy in the hand, but not too grippy, not too soft, but they're still certainly very stiff and firm when it comes to the malleability of the plastic. So you have a nice firm grip, but enough tackiness to feel like you kind of have some feel to the putter. So one other notable thing, these are very different from the EMAC Judges. They have a big bead. The EMAC Judges do not have the big bead, and the EMAC Judge is quite a bit taller, especially in the premium plastics. So these, I really enjoyed putting with these, and these will probably actually fight for a spot as my main putting putter when I move beyond throwing only dynamic discs in the future. Now, another highlight to throwing dynamic discs was this Supreme Sake Bomb Slammer. The Slammer, you guys know I'm a Berg fan, features a similar but not as deep of a thumb track. But what this lacks in similarities to the Berg, it makes up for in overstability. And that overstability is something that my Berg does not have. And I really love throwing hyzer approaches with the Slammer. When it comes to straight or anhyzer approaches, I still prefer the Berg, but I really got the chance to improve my hyzer upshot game, backhand and forehand, with the Sake Slammer, and it totally makes sense why this is such a popular disc. So now we'll talk about the other putters that I was working with. I do have the EMAC Judge here. As you can see, pretty much no bead and much domier. Basically feels like what a beadless dagger would feel like. So if you wanted a dagger, but you don't like the bead, this is going to be a good option for you. Again, a little domier, very small micro bead, but very straight flyer as a thrower. You can see, just kind of holds the line there, as you would expect a premium throwing putter to fly. Now, the other 2 putters I was working with was the Opto Air Pure and the First Run Savior. First Run Savior falls somewhere between a harp and a zone for me. Pretty overstable and very similar flight to the Slammer for me. So I was pretty much mostly leaning into the Slammer for upshots. I didn't throw this too much, but it's something that I'll probably continue to work on. Definitely flying farther than the Slammer, but still very overstable. So if I'm a little bit further out and I don't maybe want to throw a Justice, I could throw the Savior in that spot. Now, the Pure, I really enjoyed throwing a lot. And what surprised me was how actually stable this was. And what I found with these Opto Air discs was that they fly super extra true to the flight numbers. So it comes in at a -1 turn and a 1 fade. And I expected this pure to just turn over and stay turned over, but this thing flies so true to the flight numbers that it will actually turn, and because it's so lightweight, it slows down faster than the max weight versions. Once it slows down, that big fade kicks in, and it actually has a ton of stability at the end. So as long as you give it the height to work, it'll always fade at the end. So I really enjoyed throwing the Opto Air Pure, and I think overall lightweight discs can be very underrated. So Dynamics sent me a huge stack of mid-ranges to work with. The mid-range game is probably my favorite part to playing disc golf, and the mid-ranges, again, did not disappoint. I had an absolute phenomenal time throwing the mid-ranges. We're going to start with the most understable and then move into the most overstable. So the mid-range that I was leaning into the most was the Opto Air Fuse. It flies exactly like that Pure, except goes a little bit farther. And I've already been throwing fuses, and I really enjoy the fuse as a mold as a whole. But the Opto Air Fuse, again, surprised me. Really great for those early flight hyzer flips with a consistent fade at the end. Or I can just throw it flat, and it's going to stay relatively straight through most of the flight. But again, as long as I give it the height that it needs, once it slows down, just like that Pure, will always fade out at the end. So like literally the exact same flight, landing basically on top of the Pure out in the field there. Next up, we have the Lucid Orbit Ice Truth. This was probably my favorite straight flying mid, especially for forehand throws. I really love throwing this disc on those hyzer flip forehand lines when I really need to hit a tight gap in the woods on a hole less than 300 feet. I didn't quite have the distance with the putters. I could pull out this Truth and know I can basically just throw a frozen rope of a shot through a gap, trust it to pick up and turn, but have enough stability and integrity to sort of come out at the end. So picking up, going straight, and then having definitely a pretty good fade at the end. Now we also threw the EMAC Truth in the Supreme plastic. I found this one was quite a bit more stable than the Lucid Orbit Ice version, but the Truth is on the faster side for mid-ranges, and I would put it in that part where it's like right in between a fairway driver and a true mid-range. And that's not a bad thing. It just means you can get some really solid distance out of these, and they're stable enough to where you can really trust them, throw them nice and hard. You can see flying relatively straight, consistent fade at the end, no problem. Now a hair more stable than that would be the Trust 5502. Basically, to me, the exact same disc. I don't really see there being a point to have both, just because this one has the cool halo, looks a little bit cooler plastic-wise. Yeah, pretty much the exact same disc for me, flies exactly the same. Literally the exact same flight. I wouldn't, there's not really a use case to back both, in my opinion. Got Wasp. Next up, we have the Supreme Fugitive. These are very overstable. And when I wanted a overstable mid-range that was going to have more push than the Justice and more stability than the Truth, this fit right in that slot. These are super overstable, super trustworthy. As far as forehand mid-range shots go, this was my #1 favorite disc to throw on that line. And yeah, just super overstable, super reliable. If you're a power thrower or you just want a utility overstable mid-range, Supreme Fugitive would be a good choice for that shot. You can see really just sort of fading out and going much shorter than those Truths. Now my last mid-range was this Macy Vela-Diaz like baseline Justice. I think I threw it 2 times. One of the times I hit a tree, and it's got this massive like divot / dent in it. Hopefully you guys can see that. So if you've seen Aaron Gossage's zone that he calls lumpy, if I threw this thing 10 more times, it would be all lumpy and warped. And I really don't like that the disc just, I mean, I hit one tree and it has this huge dent in it. So the integrity of the plastic wasn't great. Also, if I want a super overstable mid, I don't really want it in a baseline plastic. I want it to be something that's going to last. But overall, I like the Justice mold, but the baseline Valadiaz Justice, not a huge fan. The Justice is super overstable, and that part I like because I can trust it on any flex lines, hyzer shots, but it's definitely a miss for me in the baseline plastic, and I would suggest going to get a premium version of the same mold. Obviously still flies like a Justice, but as the disc starts to get those weird warps in it, it just seems like pointless to have that. You want the Justice to be reliable, consistent, and overstable. When your disc starts getting all lumpy, that's probably not the best option when it comes to consistency in your game when your disc is all weirdly shaped. Now, the Fairway driver lineup that I was sent, I really enjoyed. And we're going to go from least stable to most stable, just like we have in the other categories. Starting off with the Lucid Air Maverick. This was a huge win for me. And I by far got more birdies with this disc than any other disc they sent me. The only one that came close was the Felon, which I'll touch on in a second here. But the Maverick, backhand, hyzer flip, turnover shots, again, flying extremely true to the flight numbers. I think the lighter weight discs flight numbers definitely become a little more accurate. You're going to get that little bit of turn with a very consistent fade. As long as you give it the height that it needs, it's going to have the time to slow down and fade. That's the trick to lightweight discs. Give them a little bit more height. You're going to get an exact replication of the flight numbers more often than not. But this thing, I mean, anything 350 and in, maybe even 375, I'm just absolutely working this disc on so many different angles. And I absolutely 2 thumbs up. This is going straight into the bag. Tight woods hyzer flips. I mean, this thing just, I was leaning onto it so much, and I'm going to continue to lean into it because it's such a good disc. Getting that little bit of turn, just holding that line, and then fading out at the end. So consistent for me, just an incredible disc. Next up is the River. It's basically everything the Maverick is, except just a hair more stable. Again, flying exactly true to the flight numbers. I think the flight numbers on the Fairway drivers were exactly right, and I was really impressed with how I could, when learning, look at the flight numbers, assume how it's going to fly, and it would just fly how I thought it was going to. So the River, basically just a slightly glidier, slightly more stable version of that Maverick. And I throw it on similar lines just when I want a little more hyzer at the end or a little bit more stability. So you can see, kind of got over on that one, but still holding that sort of hyzer flip turning line, just like the Maverick does. And another step up in stability. This one's going to be a 9-speed. We have the Escape, a little bit more stable than the other two. And I was throwing this on backhand and forehand shots, both for hyzer flip lines, and having pretty much no problems getting this disc to turn, fade, stay on Annie, stay on hyzer. The Escape's kind of that do-it-all disc. If you don't have the arm speed for a full distance driver, I would highly recommend the Supreme Escape. Supreme plastic, super premium, super comfortable in the hand. No complaints from the Escape. Having that nice turn and then a big fade at the end. But that disc goes super far relatively easily. Now, the Lucid Air Evader being the next stability up in this list surprised me for that exact reason. 0 turn, 2.5 fade. This thing is very lightweight. All these green Lucid Air discs they sent me were all like in the 140s. And I thought there's no way that this was going to be stable. And to my surprise, it was very stable. I was throwing this thing full power forehands, pretty much flat, and full power backhands on even flat or slight Annie. And it was handling it with no problem. 0 turn, 2.5 fade. Very fun T-Bird-like driver. And even in the lightweight plastic, very reliable and stable. Very easy to throw. and very reliable. Now, next up, we have the Glory and the Honor. I don't know if they're supposed to be the same, but they seem like the exact same disc to me. Like, they have the same speed in my hand, same profile, similar rim width. They're basically the exact same disc, and I never quite figured out the difference between these two, the Honor and the Glory. Pretty much flying the exact same. I don't have much to say about these other than the fact that they just fly like a super overstable, like T-Bird 3 type disc. And then that was the Honor, this is the Glory. Glory's probably a bit more stable, but for me and for my purposes, they basically flew the exact same the entire 2 weeks of throwing all Trilogy. Now, the last two discs we have for the fairway drivers are the Felons. We have the Lucid Air Felon and the Sake Bomb Felon. The Lucid Air Felon goes a lot less far than the Sake Bomb Felon, but they're both basically the same stability. Lucid Air Felon just slows down faster, gets nose down, and just crashes a lot sooner. So if you feel like you're getting too much distance on your Sake Bomb Felon, you could try out the Lucid Air Felon, and it'll take about 50 feet off of the flight. So go Lucid Air and then Sake Bomb. Super stable. Coming in with basically no speed as well. Those lightweight discs come in a lot slower and skip a lot less. So if you feel like you live in an area where it's really skippy, those Lucid Air discs also aren't going to skip nearly as much as the max weight discs. So much more forward carry than the Lucid Air, going 50 to 75 feet farther. So if you want an absolute brick, try the Lucid Air Felon. Now, as far as the distance drivers go, I didn't love the driver lineup that they sent me. I had a Rive and a Ballista Pro, and the OptoAir Ballista Pro I lost, and the Rive, super duper overstable, does fly exactly like the flight numbers. And for my arm speed, this is fine for forehand throws, but for backhand throws, I just don't have what it takes to get big distance lines out of this disc. I basically have to throw at full power on Anheuser, and it will stay turned over for a brief period of time, then fight out at the end. This is really nice for big headwinds, flex forehand shots. I was doing okay. Overall, I think the Rive is good if you have a super fast arm, but if you don't have a super fast arm, this is totally unnecessary and super duper overstable. Unless you live somewhere really windy and you need just an absolute headwind fighter, probably no use case for this for most people unless you have like Pro Tour arm speed. But I can't complain too much. It does fly exactly like the flight numbers would indicate. A 0 turn, and I think it said 3.5 fade. Very, very accurate on the flight numbers on the Rive. All right, so to give my final thoughts on throwing an entire Trilogy bag, I really enjoyed it, and I played some of the best disc golf I've played in a long time using only Trilogy discs. The only gap that I was disappointed was my distance drivers. Now, they have a huge variety of molds that I think could be really helpful to any player's game. I think the most slept on discs are probably the Opto and Lucid Air discs, especially the Opto Air Pure and the Fuse. I think basically any player could pick up and see immediate success with. Again, my pro tip on that is just give it a little more height than you're used to. It's going to turn right away and then hang on to that line for a while and then always fade out at the end, which I think is a really useful shot for 99% of disc golfers. I haven't done a video like this where I've really done a full deep dive, played a couple leagues, played some competitive rounds, and it's something that I definitely want to continue to do. So if you guys like this kind of video, comment down below. You guys are watching Iceberg TV. Thank you so much for watching my channel, and take care.